Okay, coffee. Alright, let's see, what do we got here? Alright, yeah, it's going to be another one of these. I chose this video for a few specific reasons. One of those reasons being that it allows me a decent springboard to launch my opinions on certain things off of, and another reason being I only have to listen to Lacey for a few seconds. But basically what Lacey's trying to do here is prove that some ethereal notion of male privilege exists by using trans men, with the notion that they've witnessed both sides of the gender divide. Just to give you a little preview before we get started so you know what you're getting yourself into. Plus, this video was probably tackled 9 ways to Sunday already, and forgive me if I repeat anything. But anyhow, I felt like I could add something of value here, so buckle in, folks. Take it away.
If you don't think male privilege exists, you are wrong.
And thanks for tuning in. That's the video, guys. End of story. That's not the best way to start off a video. I mean, I'm sure that's your underlying thesis within this entire video. And you're essentially just going to use a crap ton of personal experience in order to cement your claims. However, using mere personal experience doesn't actually hold anything in place well. It's not proof. It's merely anecdotal, which means that it's true in your particular circumstance, but may not be true on a widespread scale, depending on whether the anecdotes are actually true or not, obviously. But I want veterans involved with critiquing these types of claims, as in veterans of this dispute, to notice what has emerged within the discourse here. When feminists and those who peddle the privilege hierarchy were at their peak strength, they were trying to prove that women were incontrovertibly the underprivileged gender. Well, not so much trying to prove, but laughing at anyone who wanted to counter that with anything resembling evidence and calling them names pretty much. As many people have been aware, if someone's opinion objectively sucks in some way, their ideas are unworkable, or they're just flat out factually incorrect about something, instead of admitting to that when pushed up against the wall, they generally just attempt to make the opposing position evil. They rope it into a fight between facts and morality. You're forced to choose between being a good person and being a correct person, and in my personal experience, people tend to choose the former if they're easily emotionally swayed. But anyway, back to what I was saying. They've backpedaled from women are the underprivileged gender to male privilege exists. I don't deny that there are certain biological advantages with my being a man. For instance, men are in general naturally physically stronger than women are. I mean, you can take that up with biology and whine about how that's unfair, but there's nothing that any of us can do to control that. What you're speaking about, though, I think, is some sort of societal or social privilege, things that our society bestows upon men. So then we look at the laws as opposed to biology, and whoop, can't find anything here either. Except for maybe women being unable to walk around topless while men can without risk of being charged with indecent exposure. But that would depend on the state you happen to live in. To my knowledge, that isn't federal in nature, and it's not really enforced. So then we have to dive into the muddy gray area that is society and deal with a whole host of people telling us that even though we've interacted with the society for as long as we have, we are simply incapable of coming to the correct conclusion about it. Alright, first sentence and you're already rambling. Cut, self-reflection, folks. It works.
Gender bias is often ignored because it seems invisible and subjective to those who benefit from it.
I'm gonna stop you right there, Lacey. I am incredibly grateful that you said this because this is something I've wanted to dive into on this channel for a long time. This whole gender privilege seems invisible to those who benefit from it thing. If this gender bias that I benefit from is invisible and subjective to me, then what would you think of me as a rational human being if I said that I believed I had privilege? If something is invisible to me, and by invisible I don't mean literally unable to see it with the mere naked eye, but invisible as in unable to experience evidence for this thing while others are, am I not just being shamed for not taking things on faith? None of this appears to happen with any other sort of non-biological privilege out there, like economic privilege. I can look at a homeless person and recognize that I am better off than that person is. It would depend on whether they just made awful decisions and that made them homeless, or through no fault of their own, they were forced into this state through a fucked up scenario, whether it was uncontrolled privilege or not, but I can recognize it. I can see it and examine it and come to conclusions about it based on my economic status and theirs. But for some strange reason, bias in my favor is completely undetectable to me, simply due to my birth conditions. See, the thing is with these types of claims is that I can easily just turn it around on you. But for some weird reason, it is acceptable when you do it and unacceptable when I do it. That doesn't make either of us right. What if I said, Lacey, you are extremely privileged because you're a woman. And if you make any arguments against this claim, that's just an example of your being blind to your privilege. And I'm not going to provide you with any concrete evidence. Is that acceptable? Because if it is, then this is just going to turn into a scenario where any anecdote, true or not, immediately becomes a plight faced by all men and all women at every moment of the day an infinite number of times. The privilege discussion is like walking into a space where everyone becomes unable to see certain colors. And you just have to take everyone's word for it that there's a red unicorn standing in front of you, even though you can only see the color blue. Except for trans people, obviously, they can dip into the fourth dimension and report back on all these trans-dimensional concepts that none of us lowly peasants can grasp because of our feeble minds. So, Lacey, you're making one of two claims here. Either people, when they have privilege in regards to their sex, cannot see it, regardless of the extent of that privilege when concerning gender, which is trivially false for those who don't have a dogma infecting them, or that the privileges you are discussing are so minute, so inconsequential, so rare, and so trivial that people don't notice them. Admit to being blind to your female privilege, please. I've got laws to back my shit up. The most obvious being 18 U.S.C. 116. And there being no 18 U.S.C. 116 male edition.
But trans men have experienced both sides of the gender-divided society, so I'm gonna let them explain male privilege in their own words.
You think that's clever, don't you? Like, I'd believe you'd choose a bunch of trans people who would contradict what you propose in the first place. Are all of these trans men feminists? Trans people don't have some sort of wisdom that the rest of us can't attain through mere observation. You can't just bust out some trans people and say, you know how we men and women have been arguing so much? Well, here are a bunch of transcendent... I swear I don't keep doing that on purpose. Transcendent trans people who will stop this bickering, and conveniently they all agree with me. Women and men are not the sides that are arguing with each other, by the way. There are women who argue that women have more privilege than men, and there are men who argue that men have more privilege than women. Also, do trans women's lives just get instantly shittier? Like they abandon all of these privileges and resign themselves to be trembling flowers for the rest of their lives? Because I can find counterexamples for you. I have a strong hunch that this is just going to be feminist arguments. Now with trans people! How fucking insulting is that? God help us all. Actually, don't help. It's not helping.
Male privilege is the bullshit idea that men are better than anybody else.
The bullshit idea that men are better than anybody else. You mean that men are better than women? Do you honestly see men as some sort of minority of complete dickheads that we've allowed to ravage the countryside for too long or something? Men are nearly half the population. Men are objectively better than women in general in certain areas. Difficult manual labor being one of them. But in any case, I don't like speaking in these types of generalities because there are always numerous exceptions to them. But that doesn't make those general statements incorrect. If you're speaking generally, are men better than women? No, I wouldn't believe that in the slightest, and I'd sincerely like you to hold some sort of poll where you ask, do you think men are better than women in the United States, and report your findings. Stand on a public platform in this country and say, women are better than men, and listen to the crowd. Then say, men are better than women, and listen to the disconnect. It is more acceptable in this society at present to say that women are better than men. But people are recognizing that nonsense at a snail's pace, so we'll get there eventually. I prefer my position. Men and women have complementary strengths and weaknesses, but neither are better than the other.
Male privilege is the ability to move about the world in the way that you want to.
Male privilege, folks. Bask in the glow. You jealous yet?
It's the experience of being left alone and free to be yourself.
Women aren't allowed to be themselves, or allowed to be left alone. It happens all the goddamn time. See, this is the problem with your entire personal experience, premised argument, whatever this is. You rely on these philosophical-sounding, vague words that don't actually mean anything, yet when I try to boil it down, to have some sort of method of measuring it, defining it, or observing it, I'm called some sort of ignorant moron for not quite getting it. Okay. Every single counterexample doesn't disprove this general statement I'm making in this monstrously sweeping way, idiot. For some reason, my idea about society is by default correct, and you're the moron who thinks his interactions with society have any bearing on the truth. Just because you haven't observed something doesn't make it not true. Just because I can't provide concrete evidence of something doesn't make it not true. Yeah, I know this game. Internet philosophers play it all the time. They take technically true statements and act like it's active support for their proposition. For example, I actually had a long, drawn-out argument with someone who told me that you cannot see forests. You can only see the individual trees. I don't think it needs to be said that a group of individual trees is basically the definition of a forest. I'm going to need some evidence for this idea that women are not allowed to be themselves in this society to a greater extent than men are not allowed to be themselves within this society. Please and thank you. Oh God, it's a pack of wild internet philosophers.
Why do you think you can determine what is and isn't incorrect? You've yet to define incorrect. Isn't that just as absurd a position as the one you're arguing against?
Saying that our positions are absurd is your calling us incorrect, jackass.
What if it's just some program forcing you into an illusion that...
Yeah? What if there's another program that counteracts that
Truth
one?
is relative anyway.
That's just your opinion.
You're an idiot!
No, you're an idiot.
Do you understand the metaphysical implications of calling me an idiot? It runs against every single epistemology we know of. We simply cannot have this type of nonsense plaguing the human mind when we attempt to.
Privilege is also like the absence of experience. As a man, I have the privilege of getting on New York City subway train at 1 a.m. and don't have to worry about a man wagging his dick at me.
Unless he's gay. Oh, wait, no, I forgot. Only straight guys do that, the fucking pigs. How often does that actually happen? Someone waving their dick at someone else on public transit. Is this the new thing? Shives referenced it in one of his videos, and now it shows up in this pathetic excuse for an argument that male privilege exists. Is that the new feminist male privilege talking point? That dudes just can't seem to keep it in their pants when they're on public transit. And why public transit? What is it about public transportation that makes men uncontrollably horny for some reason? How often did you actually worry about getting an unwarranted dick display? Obviously, I'm mocking you because that's honestly all I have to do at this point. How about I transition into a woman and then start screaming about how much I love that women aren't shoving their vaginas in my face at concert venues, and that's female privilege now because that totally makes sense. Your logical framework is more funny than it is compelling. I love this line of thinking. I can just say and do whatever I want because concrete support of any type just denies my personal experience.
That is a male privilege that I like.
The first time I noticed I had male privilege was when I was walking home from hanging out with a bunch of friends who happened to be women. They had expressed being a little worried about walking home in the dark, and while I was walking, I realized that I had no worry in the world about being talked to or stared at or followed or assaulted.
You know, I think I finally figured out why I hate this format of video so much. The random people dishing out their personal life with the brain-numbing music in the background. The guy answering this question while swaying back and forth for some reason. I despise marketing. I hate the shit that goes on in advertisements. That's all this is. This is a commercial for believing in male privilege. They aren't dishing out actual arguments. This isn't a debate. This isn't any sort of thought experiment or exercise. It's just people talking about how satisfied they are with a product. It sounds just like people saying, I had such a difficult time getting out these stains from my kid's football gear, but then I found male privilege, and it got those grass stains out in a flash. I'm surprised Billy Mays isn't jumping out and screaming, Billy Mays here for male privilege! What is this nonsense? It only costs 4 easy payments of a quarter of your sanity and dignity. You're watching a commercial for an idea, folks. This is a marketing campaign for a worldview. It doesn't so much care about what's true so long as you buy it. Don't buy it.
So a man could just walk down the street and no one is going to bother him. No one's going to ask him to smile. No one's going to ask him where he's going. No one's going to ask him if he's married. No one's going to ask him if they can walk with him. But this is something that I know women experience every day.
Also, I thought that trans people were just being murdered left and right in this country. How do you reconcile those two things? You're a man now, so you totally get all the male privilege and feel comfortable walking down the street at night, but you're also trans, so you fear for your life at every moment of the day walking down the street because we just love murdering trans people. Fuck, your lives are fucking Ferris wheels.
Post-transition life, my God, walking down the street is so glorious. I can actually think.
It sucks you aren't walking down the street while recording this video. I could use some thinking from you.
First time I ever experienced male privilege was on social media. I've always been the type to express myself and talk real crazy.
It's only a joke if I make it one.
And when I did it prior to transition, it wasn't okay. But the minute that I transitioned and everybody looked at me as that male figure, it was like, oh man, that's hilarious. I'm like, hey guy, I've been hilarious all this time. So what are you talking about?
Citation needed. Male privilege, folks. Does it count if you're funny by accident?
An unexpected aspect of male privilege for me was being taken way more seriously than I was before, and
it's funny
because I have all the same ideas, still thinking about the same things, and yet sometimes I would literally just be talked over.
Yeah, okay, hold on there, sweet cheeks. It's difficult to argue against people's personal experiences because you can't actually verify whether they're true or not. But I'm beginning to think that that's how this type of crap begins propagating as quickly as it has. You technically can't refute any of it, and yet if I sat here and said, I'm a dude, people talk over me all the time. Some people are just assholes or unaware of social etiquette, whatever. The people who support this type of stuff will turn around and actually say to me, just because your personal experience was different, it doesn't mean that this represents all of society, and then be completely unaware of the irony. And since you can't actively refute it, it's just a confirmation bias vending machine. People who already believe this stuff will watch this and say, people getting more of that male privilege, and people who disagree will be told, nah, you can't refute us because we're talking about our personal lives. Fuck off. Seriously, make a substantial argument or retire from the debate. You're useless.
Having experienced that from both sides of the spectrum, as female and male, I call bullshit on that right now.
Absolutely, your transness. You are the oracle that will guide us to equality.
Male privilege and sexism isn't just a problem for women, but it's also about liberating ourselves. Masculinity is very diverse. Masculinity is what it is to you. You don't have to be a brute. You don't have to be an athlete. And my masculinity looks like a man who likes puppies and babies. And there's nothing wrong with that.
You gotta be fucking kidding. Roll the tape!
The experience of being left alone and
free to be yourself.
I was in the club this night and my brothers are around. I think it might have been Single Ladies. Something came on and I'm like, the Single Ladies, the Single. And they go, you're a man now. Men don't wild out to Beyonce like that. And I said, but it's music.
Free to be yourself.
Yep, folks. Female privilege doesn't exist. Anything that women can do in society that's frowned upon when men do it is just a byproduct of male privilege. It's not female privilege at all. How in the world does this work as any sort of practical idea, let alone a consistent one? Women aren't allowed to be themselves, and that's a benefit that men enjoy as a privilege, but men aren't allowed to be themselves because of the male privilege that afflicts them. This is what they must actually believe. These are real thoughts that people have one after the other, and they think it's fine. It's like someone saying, the sky is always blue, but not always, and then arrogantly dismissing the person who says, well, which is it, as an uneducated, blind simpleton. They think that's a completely rational view to take. Oh, men of Athens, this type of cognitive error is pretty much always present in people advocating for special treatment while pretending like they are advocating for fairness. Why else would they have said essentially, women are lucky they don't have male privilege because having male privilege harms men? That's not a privilege at all, but men are lucky to have male privilege because it gives them benefits over women. It is a privilege to not have privilege. But that doesn't mean that's an example of privilege. Alright, this is starting to hurt my head to inhuman degrees. But we like to think we've moved on from ancient practices such as placing all of the sins onto an innocent animal and sending it off to die. But we haven't. We're consistently on the brink of the end of the world as we know it, and it's this race, this gender, or this harmless behavior doing it. And yet when you try to criticize the scapegoaters, pompous pricks will convince everyone that you are a hypocrite for scapegoating the scapegoaters, and people will believe it. And with that, conveniently, the actual scapegoating, the actual blaming of innocent people for problems, real and imagined, goes unchecked. It never gets discussed and resolved. Humanity will always overcorrect. That's why we're stuck doing slightly more muddied versions of ancient rituals we all think we've grown out of. We haven't. But I do have hope. I have hope in us because we do these rituals in the hope that it will make things better, safer, and happier for those we care about. We're always striving to make a better world. What people don't realize is that when you take things too far in the service of that cause, it will necessarily make things worse, more dangerous, and more depressing for those who you don't give a shit about. Now, compare the number of people in the world who care about you to the number of people in the world who don't give a shit about you. Try not to go insane.
There's no one way to be a man. There's a spectrum of masculinity, and just like, be chill.
If a guy wants to really understand male privilege and understand what it is, talk to women.
I talk to women all the time, and I still don't understand what in the hell you tried to do here. This just sounded like an advertisement coupled with an ideological fishing expedition. Male privilege is this vague thing that doesn't actually happen for a lot of men and happens for a lot of women, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen for a lot of men and doesn't happen for a lot of women, so male privilege, duh!
Step back, listen to what other people are going through, ask them what they're going through, and I think you'll see that the world doesn't run exactly the way you think it does.
You think I need to say anything after that? Mm-hmm. No, you can't. Couldn't have said it better myself, I mean.
You're doing nothing wrong by having privilege. It's just what you do with it that matters.
What are you doing with your newly found privilege? How much of your privilege have you donated to women since you transitioned? I donate nearly 3/4 of my privilege every year. It's a very large transaction. Why does this keep happening?
I'd like to thank all of our
Oh, God. Whew. Okay. Well, I mean, I think that's the end of it. Stop acting like society's high school. You can't just make a commercial of gossip and act like it's saying anything salient. Have a wonderful day.